So welcome back to Legal Tech Briefs. I'm Zach Posner, your host, and today we have a guest and a friend who's been at the forefront of transforming the legal industry. Jack is the CEO and the founder of Clio, and he's really a true pioneer in cloud-based legal technology. I believe Jack's been at this for over a decade, and he's really just been on a mission to revolutionize the practice of law, championing security, ethics, and innovation in and around legal tech. He's a naturally recognized author, speaker. He's got his own podcast, A Visionary, and his impact on one of the world's oldest professions continues to shape what the future is going to look like. There's also really no better friend to early stage companies. I don't know if you talk about this stuff enough, but Jack has personally thought about this. And, when you go to his conference, you see just rows of startup booths. So I think that there's no better friend to an early stage tech company in this vertical, but then Jack. So Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Maybe before we dive in, because I think there's so many different ways we can take this, maybe provide a little context on Clio, its shape, its size, its scale. It's pretty impressive what you're working on.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So your earlier comment that I've been at this for more than a decade has actually now been the better part of 2 decades. Clio is 17 years in, launched in 2008, just as the cloud was emerging as a new computing model. We were actually the very first cloud-based practice management system to launch worldwide. So we've been at this for a while. Clio has grown from 2 people back in 2008 when it was myself and my co-founder Ryan Govero were the only 2 people at the company. To today, in 2025, we are 1,300 people worldwide. We have customers in over 130 countries. So we have, of course, the critical mass of our customers is in the United States, but we have a really active user base in Canada, in the UK, Ireland, Australia, and now have offices in 5 cities, including Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Dublin, and Sydney. So we've really become a worldwide company. And from a scale perspective, we're well north now of 250 million ARR, continuing to grow extremely quickly. And incredibly enough, I still see us as being in the very early innings of driving the kind of transformation and growth story we want to achieve in legal tech, and see the next major milestone on our growth journey as reaching $1 billion of ARR.
That's amazing. If we rewind, talking about being the first player to the cloud, what was that initial reaction? Like and sometimes what's amazing is that you were the first and, you're still here in a major leadership position in this space where, like, sometimes we've seen that sometimes it's better to be like second or third, and the first gets the knife in their back.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious what the initial reaction was and what you guys did to kind of like really capture this and still be here as strong as anybody, if not the strongest.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I see our success, as really being a function of, I think, getting the timing right, and to your point, I think the timing is critical, and executing really well, frankly, and I think if we'd launched a year earlier, I do think we probably would have failed. And if we'd launched a year later, we would have been the second or third product on the market. So I think that first mover advantage really compounded into a very dominant position. We are today 2 or 3 times the size of our next closest competitor in the LPM space. And I attribute much of that to the fact that we've just achieved really high NPS. We achieved very high NPS and very high advocacy very early in our growth journey. And that just compounds. That compounds year over year over year. And now when a lawyer asks the question of, say, 5 of their colleagues, what technology platform do you use? The majority of them will say Clio. And that will usually decide what that lawyer will go off and buy, because it's what the majority of their peer set is using. And they not only say, I'm using Clio, but they say, I love Clio. But to your question on, rewinding the clock to 2008 and the reception we had, just to set the the context here, and I know you've probably invested in founders that were born after 2008, Zach. So I'll do a little bit of storytelling here. This was number one in the depths of the global financial crisis. So anyone that's raised money over the last 5 years and thought it was tough, has no idea what tough was. Like, that was an extremely hard time to raise capital. And we're also very early in the cloud and technology wave that has dominated the last 20 years. We, just to set the stage a little bit, 2007, Steve Jobs released the first iPhone. So 2008 was still, legal was dominated by the BlackBerry. All the LPM software in the market, it was a highly fragmented market, but it was all, on-premise software. It was all LexisNexis and Time Matters and PC Law and Amicus Attorney and Abacus. It was a very fragmented, very on-prem system. And from a cloud perspective, Dropbox was released in 2008 as well. So we're very early in the adoption cycle. And I remember me and Ryan standing in our first booth at ABA Tech Show back in 2008, March of 2008. And I'd say we had, probably an even split of people coming up to our booth saying either, I love this idea, I've been waiting for somebody to build a web-based system for me to run my practice, and thank you, you are my savior, with interleaved with an equal number of conversations that were more or less of the tenor, you're enabling irresponsible behavior for lawyers. You are morally reprehensible for setting up this cloud-based system. I can't believe you're setting us up to practice law in an unethical way. And it was just amazing how stark those extremes were. And then, we had all the on-prem vendors and a lot of naysayers laying down a bunch of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, saying this idea.
I'm sure they were having their day with that.
Totally having their day, totally feeding the FUD machine and saying this idea will never work and lawyers will get disbarred for using a product like Cleo and so on and so forth. So the early days were very interesting. But what I would say is we realized very early that we could either get dragged along by this fear, uncertainty, and doubt about the cloud, or we could lead the conversation, and decided to really invest in leading the conversation and started writing white papers about embracing the cloud, about the security and ethics of cloud computing for lawyers. I started speaking at every CLE I could get an invite to around the security and ethics of cloud computing, and really just tried to raise the bar on awareness, and made what sounded like a really audacious claim in 2008 that I think is generally accepted wisdom today, but that the cloud was more secure than your average on-premise deployment for a solo or small firm. And if you looked at the average IT system for a solo small firm back then, number one, they probably weren't using any kind of practice management system at all. And if they were, it was running on a server in their broom closet, hooked up right to the internet with no firewall and probably with an unpatched version of Windows. So, we made this claim that, look, this is a much more secure, much easier to deploy, and ultimately much more affordable model of computing that is a great fit for solos and small firms. And of course, we've gone into the mid-market and beyond today. But back then, we were really laser focused on the solos and small firms. And thankfully, we had just enough of a early adopter crowd that said, this resonates with me and this solves my problems. And over the last 17 years, I think we've helped really move the cloud from this bleeding edge technology that had a lot of skepticism and FUD around it to what is widely regarded today as table stakes for any law firm, especially in the age of AI.
But I feel like these are also the things where I was talking about that number one leadership position, where it's just so hard to be number one because you're like fighting these battles.
Yeah, we're that
2, 3, 4, 10. Like they don't,
going and changing an industry and transforming an industry. But I think, that as you pointed out, sometimes that leads to a first mover disadvantage because you are doing that trailblazing, and thankfully. We've ended up in a very strong leadership position, despite kind of having to to blaze that trail.
All right, I'll give you two ways we can take this: a leadership or technology. Which one you want to hit next?
Let's talk about technology. I'd love to go.
Okay, technology. Here's a couple things. You've technically been through, or you've been through exactly with probably the three biggest, transitions from a technology perspective. First, things moving to the cloud. Second, mobile, and third, AI. And I'm curious your thoughts of the scale, the order of magnitude of each one of these, and then maybe just like your thoughts, where we're sitting with AI, and we'll keep going, but curious, like just how you think about those three things.
Well, look, just in terms of raw order of magnitude, I do see the AI transformation wave as being orders of magnitude more significant than the transition we saw with the cloud or with mobile. And in a lot of ways, it's probably the most important technological advancement and most impactful technological advancement we've made in humankind's history. With no sense of hyperbole. I think if you look at all the advances we've made, all the way from the vacuum tube to the transistor to the cloud to mobile, it's been building towards this apex of AI. And I think what is uniquely different about AI, number one, is the pace of innovation and the pace of change. And I lived the cloud transition, and it was a transition that took, I think, really, 15 years to fully play out, from the time you started hearing about the cloud to it having, really profound impact on the industry and being kind of table stakes. And in fact, if you look at Clio's latest legal trends report, we've got a really fascinating comparison of the cloud adoption curve versus the AI adoption curve. And the cloud adoption curve is basically a linear curve that, progresses over a decade to get to about 75% adoption. And the AI adoption curve, over about 18 months, gets to the same level of adoption. So, an order of magnitude faster from an adoption perspective. And then from an innovation perspective, the cloud took a while to diffuse around the industry and become widely adopted, but the core technology really stayed the same. And with the AI revolution, the pace of technological innovation, the pace at which these models are advancing, I've never experienced anything like it in my professional career. And I don't think we've ever seen a pace of innovation any technology at any time in human history. It's just literally, as you know, Zach, I can only imagine what it's like being on the forefront of investment in this area as well. You're seeing changes in a week that used to take a year, and you and I could get off this call and catch up on all the news that happened in AI and large language models and so on. So the pace, I think, is just incredible, and it feels like it's accelerating in some ways.
So couldn't agree more. Curious if you think we're just like touching the potential of it, or if you think that we're getting there to understand what it can be. You talked about this thing in 2007 that was released. Do you know what the number? You may recall what, or you may not recall what the number one app was in 2008 for this thing. It was the number one free app was something called iBeer, where you go and drink a beer. The number one paid app is more interesting. It was Flashlight, because but like, if I look at that and say, hey, that's 2 years in, I mean, technically we're directionally about 2 years in with this AI revolution. We saw the demo in November of 22. Like, it really feels like, from my end, we're just getting started, yet every week the technology is leapfrogging, per your comment.
Exactly. I think we're just getting started. And if you look at the, I think, to the degree that you buy into the scaling laws continuing to apply, we're seeing, this huge amount of investment in data centers, in scale, in data, in synthetic data now being fed into these systems. And we're seeing the capabilities continue to leap. We're seeing, for example, on programming benchmarks, just in the space of a year, an AI going from about 30% grade relative to a high performing human programmer to 90% in a year. And I think we're seeing those kinds of advances in so many other fields, and we're just getting started on the change. One of my favorite quotes, Zach, is we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. And I think, like the iPhone, you could look at some of those apps in 2008, 2009, and think this is a toy, and it's got a lot of limitations. But you look at where mobile phones have gotten over the last 15 years. I think we'll be looking at AI in 15 years and have a level of impact that we can't anticipate. And maybe that's what is the most interesting aspect to this whole wave that we're in, Zach, is I think any technologist that really understood the cloud back in 2008, and I certainly felt in this kind of position, and it's part of what helped me see the future that was very obvious to me, but not obvious to everyone. But you could really see where the cloud was going. And to me, it was just inevitable that everything in legal would eventually be in the cloud, and that every industry would eventually be in the cloud. That's obvious today, but it was not obvious in 2008. But I think it was obvious to anyone that was steeped in the technology. I think what's very different about the AI era that we're in is nobody, even the people that are most steeped in the technology, can say where we'll be in 10 years or in 5 years even. And to me, that is a uniquely exciting, but also uniquely uncertain thing about the phase transition we're in. So I think, to sum up my response to a pretty wide-ranging question, I think we're seeing the pace of innovation compressed by an order of magnitude. We're seeing the impact of the innovation way beyond what we saw with the impact of the cloud. Like this is, helping automate what human beings do. This is fundamentally changing the nature of the work that we as human beings execute against. And the trajectory that these large language models are on is entirely unclear, even to people that are deeply steeped in the technology. So it's a very interesting and very exciting time to be in the field.
And how do you think, I think of the flashlight as a very specific app, and then I think of iOS as something very broad. I'm curious how you think about applying AI for the next couple of years. Do you think of this across Clio, the entire platform? Do you think of this as module by module? How do we help our attorneys round corners with it? Do you think this is gradual, or do you think this stuff, a lot of this lives in Microsoft and you guys are just, helping organize everybody? And how do you think about this when you think about a product roadmap?
Well, I think there's a bunch of shorter term, more direct and more easy to anticipate values that AI can bring into a law firm. So we can help automate the document drafting process. We can help automate your intake process. We can help tell you where you should be investing your marketing dollars to maximize ROI. And if you look at what Duo, our AI product, is doing, it's bringing a lot of that value to life in the product today. I think where things get very interesting is when we think, where are things at a couple of years down the road, as in particular agentic AI workflows become more deeply embedded in software and become even more capable. You can see agentic AI helping automate and streamline many phases of the client journey as they go through their journey with a law firm. I could see intake being completely automated by AI. You are no longer phoning a law firm or emailing a law firm and dealing with a human being, but an agentic AI is helping answer the phone, helping route emails, helping respond to emails, and helping decide if a client is a good fit for your practice or not. That agentic AI could also help schedule a meeting with you. And I think a lawyer will be sitting down increasingly at their desk with a cup of coffee in hand, with their day scheduled by an agentic AI. Here's your 2 or 3 intake meetings with clients that we think are a good fit for your practice. Here's your 2 or 3 face-to-face meetings. The AI has helped draft a document for you to walk into that meeting. And increasingly, I think software like Cleo and a lawyer's job will evolve to orchestrating the activities of these agentic AIs. And of course, a human being in the loop is critical. I think in many cases, it's absolutely essential in the legal use case. Sure. And these products like Cleo will be more oriented around surfacing decisions and surfacing recommendations to lawyers and making recommendations on where they're spending their time, helping support them in doing documents. And I think ultimately a lawyer will feel like Cleo is made up of 10 full-time support staff that are helping them run their practice, except those 10 full-time support staff are agentic AI. And that's a really exciting future that I'm excited about creating at Cleo. And as you can see, that's a fundamental transition in how we as human beings are spending our time. But where I'm ultimately excited about that transition is I think it helps us transition to the highest and best use of our time and focus on, in some ways, what are our most human strengths, and delegate to AI what AI is best at, which is repeatable, routine tasks that these LLMs are extremely strong at.
All right, to shift a little bit, I think you mentioned the 1,300 folks. Is that,
yep.
And which is coincidentally, I wanted to ask you a little bit about leadership, and there's a 1 in 3 rule that I think about quite a bit, and it basically says every time you put a 1 or 3 in front of your employee count, every process you do breaks. When you hire your first employee, whatever you and your co-founder were doing broke. When you got to 3, you had to think about payroll. When you went from 3 to 10, maybe you're off Excel and you're using QuickBooks. When you go from 10 to 30, 30 to 100, 100 to 3, et cetera. Walk me through that. It's amazing to see you sitting in this seat because very few people can make those transitions. And I'm just curious what those transitions have been like for you, and just how you felt throughout the years. Because I mean, you're doing something very differently than standing up there giving a CLE course.
yeah, exactly.
Although you still do a lot. I mean,
I still give a lot of talks. That's for sure. But no, it's a great question. It's one of the questions I get too, in the vein of you've been at this for 17 years. How are you still kind of dialed in and excited about what's going on? And the answer when I get that question is like, look, I'm still excited and motivated and challenged at Cleo because it's a different job every quarter. As you pointed out, we've gone from 2 people to 1,300 people. I'm running every quarter the biggest company I've ever run. So it's a unique and exciting challenge. I would say as I think about the kind of phase transitions we've gone through as a company and the challenges those presented, I think about as you pointed out, the 2 to 10 phase as being really critical. I characterize the first 10 hires you make at a startup as a company as the most 10 important hires you'll ever make. You're shaping the future of the culture. You're shaping the future of the company with those first 10 hires. And I think me and Ryan got incredibly lucky in our first 10 hires and brought on 10 incredible people that helped shape the incredible company culture that we still enjoy today. You see the echoes of those first 10 people in the 1,300 people that are at Cleo today. So that's one phase I think that is so crucial, that you look at, what kind of, it's not even, are they a culture fit at 10 people? Yeah. You're saying like, how will this person help define our culture, which is really a high stakes and important thing to get right. I think what we experienced as the next major transition was around 150 people, which is around the Dunbar number, if you've heard that term before. But for anyone that's listening that hasn't heard that term, there's this concept from Charles Dunbar, a social psychologist, that we can keep approximately 150 social relationships in our head at any time. So, I can bump into Jason in the elevator and know his name, recognize him, ask him how his wife and kids are doing, remember how old his kids are. We can keep about 150 of those relationships in our head. And I remember a really, strange phase to be going through at Clio was where we exceeded that Dunbar number. And, Ryan and I bumped into somebody in the kitchen that we were like, not sure if they were an employee or if they were here for an interview or if they were here to, add drinks to the fridge, like we weren't sure what their job was. And the other thing we saw was that people stopped understanding automatically what was important, what were the priorities for the business, and why were they important. And we also saw that the culture, in some ways, was something we felt we had to be more explicit about defining. I think in 2 to 150 people, we felt like culture was kind of automatic, and it was amazing. And as I mentioned, we made these 10 incredible first hires. Some of which, by the way, are still with the company today in a variety of leadership positions, which is great to see. But we went through a big change there where we realized, like, look, we need a better way of communicating our goals and objectives. So we implemented OKRs at the company level that helped ladder down through the entire organization. OKRs, for anyone that hasn't heard the term, are objectives and key results. It's a system originally developed by John Doerr and famously adopted it at Google, but then many other companies over the years. And we also went to the work of defining our values. We did kind of a grassroots effort at the company and asked employees what they felt was special about Clio, what defined our values, and walked away with that with our 7 core values that still stand today. But we made it an explicit part of our hiring process. And by the way, part of our promotion and even firing process, where if people aren't aligned with our values, if they're not living our values, if they're doing things that are contrary to our values, it's reflected in all of our actions around hiring and promotion. And I think that's truly how you bring your values to life. And then frankly, with that infrastructure in place, scaling from 150 to 500 to 1,000 and now 1,300 people has been pretty straightforward. Like, we've got the right infrastructure in place. We've got the right leadership principles, values, OKRs in place. And I found the biggest transition to be, and it's hard because it's kind of a permanent transition, but moving from a company where everybody and what everyone is doing to everybody knowing who you are. Everybody knows who I am and can chat with me in the elevator about how me and my kids are doing, but me being forevermore in this slightly uncomfortable position of riding in an elevator with, probably 2 or 3 Cleons that I've never met before, just because we're growing so quickly.
I'm intentionally trying not to make this a press release, but for you guys, but like I do, like, I mean, I know you guys have been voted best employer for young folks in Canada. Like, you're doing something right, and it's amazing to see the awards continuously coming in.
Thank you. Yeah.
To a company that's growing where you would expect it to go the opposite. I actually have like over a page full of questions. We are going to have time sensitivity, so maybe I gotta make sure we get some questions in about some advice you'd give to earlier stage entrepreneurs. I don't know. Let's take you. There's lots. We talk. If you blend everything we talked about today, like, you're sitting in a place where technology is moving faster than it ever has before. We've seen companies in Y Combinator that have become obsolete during the course of the the accelerator because technology has been. What advice would you give to entrepreneurs thinking specifically about this vertical?
So number one, I think pick up a copy of Steve Blank's book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany. This is one of my all-time favorite Bibles on how to build a startup, how to build a company. One of Steve Blank's mentors, or mentees rather, is Eric Ries, who wrote the Lean Startup, which is probably a better known book. But what I love about 4 Steps to the Epiphany is Steve articulates this model around doing customer development and really understanding your customer problems, the customer problems you're trying to solve for, and working backwards from those problems. And I think all too often, especially in this, kind of shiny object era around AI, you can end up really becoming obsessed with a solution and then trying to find a problem that you can apply that solution to. And I think it's a lot more straightforward to go really deep with your customers, understand what their day looks like, understand what their key pain points are, and then work from there, work backwards from the customer problem to what are the right technologies and solutions that you can apply to solve those problems. And I think you find, especially right now, I think a lot of companies that are, kind of a hammer looking for a nail, and you need to orbit around the customer and the customer segment you're trying to solve problems for. And Steve does a fantastic job of outlining how to do customer development rather than product development. And the beautiful thing about that model is it's basically a model that transcends any technology wave, whether it's the cloud or whether it's mobile or whether it's AI. I think that's the fundamentally right way to approach building a company.
And I think that gets magnified by the pace of technology change, because it's almost like, hey, create a spectacular customer experience that they're looking for. And the technology you can swap in, swap out as it gets better. But if you get those customers on your product, good things will likely happen.
Exactly. Especially when things are changing as quickly as they are, the way you solve that problem might be incrementally better and different, in a year from now than today. But if you've done the right work of defining the problem and defining the customer, you can more readily adapt to a changing technology landscape.
And then the final question, what should startups be doing to work more closely with you guys?
Well, look, we've got an incredible app integration ecosystem. You pointed out in the opening, Zach, we've got Cleocon, which is, I think, maybe alongside your TLTF Summit, one of the best conferences in the world for legal innovators and legal entrepreneurs. And we've got an integration ecosystem in an alley full of startups, over 100 startups that exhibit at and participate at ClioCon. We have over 300 integration partners that have built on top of the Clio ecosystem. So what we're really trying to position Clio as is as the operating system for legal. And if you're building an application for lawyers, you don't need to reinvent the wheel of practice management and time tracking and billing and matter management. You can build on top of what we've built for 17 years at Clio, and then go focus on, back to that Steve Blank 4 steps to epiphany comment, go focus on the specific customer problem you want to categorically solve, and integrate and build on top of Clio as part of your growth model. And you can tap into the 150,000 plus user base that we've built on top of Clio over the last 17 years.
Jack, that is amazing. Thank you so much. For me, thank you so much for taking some time to chat on behalf of the entire early stage community, which we're a part of. Thank you for the work you do. I think the stuff you do at ClioCon, the stuff I know that you guys are aggressively out there trying to get startups on the marketplace. I think it's, you're kind of pushing the entire community forward. But special thanks for spending a few minutes with us, and looking forward to seeing you soon in person.
Likewise, thanks for having me, Zach, and thank you also for everything you're doing to help support the ecosystem. It's an exciting time for legal tech.
That it is. Talk soon.